Thrilling Stories of the Railway by V. L. Whitechurch. Cases from the private notebook of Thorpe Hazell, book collector, railway enthusiast, and gentleman of independent means. The Affair of the Birmingham Bank. Thorpe Hazell looked on the affair of the Birmingham Bank from a distinctly humorous point of view. The Bank of Crosby, Penfold & Co. was an old established one in Birmingham, numbering many leading manufacturers among its customers. The firm had become aware they had a powerful enemy, the German multimillionaire named Peter Kinch. His reputation was none of the best in the financial world, and he had a personal quarrel with the senior partner, old Mr. Crosby. Deep down in that keen financial brain of his was a strong instinct of revenge. However, outwardly he seemed to have made it up. Then, one day, he deposited £200,000 with the bank. "I have so much business in Birmingham," he explained. Crosby didn't like it, and proposed keeping it intact in their strong-room, but the other partners prevailed upon him to invest it in securities. For some months nothing was heard about it. Then strange rumours got about regarding the bank. People began to ask for their cash, and quite a little run took place. Suddenly Kinch announced that he wanted his £200,000 immediately. The partners met in their private room. "He wants every penny tomorrow," said Crosby. "We must face it." "Under ordinary circumstances we could have paid easily," said Penfold. "But it's awkward just now. I can't understand matters." "I can," said Crosby. "I believe we're victims of a plot that Kinch is working. Partly private, perhaps, but there's something else at the bottom of it. He could afford to sacrifice his money here if he gained his ends." "But what is his object?" asked Penfold. "Railway contracts," replied Crosby. "It's a question of Hill & Co. and a couple of other firms here, cutting German estimates. If we were to stop payment, there would be a serious lack of ready money, because those firms do most of their business with us. If they can't be sure of ready money now, they daren't undertake the contracts. And in steps Kinch. It's a smart bit of business." He glanced out of the window. "Look." It was 10 to 10. Already 6 people were outside. "I suppose," said Penfold, "we can hold out today." "For today," replied Crosby, "we have a fair supply of cash. But we must have more before we open tomorrow. We will telegraph to the Imperial and City asking them to get money ready. Then perhaps, Charles, you could bring it down this evening." The Imperial and City Bank acted as London agents for Crosby, Penfold & Co., and would raise the necessary funds on the firm's securities. Simpson, one of the senior cashiers, had been selected to accompany Charles Penfold to London. "One of the juniors was asked a lot of questions last night," said Simpson, "by a suspicious-looking stranger. Just now he saw this same man hanging about the bank." "I'll wire to my friend Thorpe Hazell to meet me at the Imperial and City," said Penfold. "What he doesn't know about railways isn't worth knowing. I'd rather have him than an ordinary detective if there's going to be any attempt at robbery on the line." Thus Thorpe Hazell found himself with Charles Penfold at 3 o'clock that day in a private room at the Imperial and City Bank. "I am sure we are being watched," said Penfold. "You noticed it, didn't you, Simpson?" "Distinctly, sir. A taxi followed us here." Then Penfold explained to Hazell about the German contracts. The latter's face brightened. "Suppose your hypothesis is correct and the robbery took place, what would happen?" "Well, Kinch would wire to Germany without delay, anticipating the fact that we should have to stop payment tomorrow. He has everything ready, we know." "And suppose he put the machinery in motion, and after all you could pay tomorrow. What about that?" "Well, he wouldn't be such a fool. Why, it would cost him $1 million. When a man like Kinch makes a slip, it's pretty bad for his reputation." Hazell slapped Penfold on the shoulder. "Excellent, my dear chap. I thought at first you were only bringing me an ordinary case of attempted train robbery. But this is quite a little comedy, in fact. That is, if you will place yourself in my hands entirely." "Very well," replied Penfold. but I don't quite see your meaning." "Mr. Simpson," Hazell said to the cashier, "there's an ABC 50 yards from the bank. Would you mind bringing me a pint of milk and a packet of Plasmon chocolate?" As soon as Simpson was out of the room, Hazell exclaimed, "Quick, get the cash. It ought to be ready by now. We must pack that bag before Simpson returns." "I'm afraid I'm going to impose on him. I shall want another bag. Mine will do. We'll ask the people here to lend us some weights." 2 of the directors came in with the money. Meanwhile, Hazell was rapidly jotting notes, which he handed to Penfold. "Follow these directions carefully." "Well, Mr. Simpson," he went on as the cashier came back, "Mr. Penfold agrees that you had better take the money with me. He's not feeling well, and he's going for a little holiday. You and I will start directly, but I'll see Mr. Penfold off first." He hailed a hansom, and, as Penfold got in, said in a loud voice, "Don't worry. Simpson and I can manage. I hope you'll find your sister better when you get to Bournemouth. It may not be so bad as the telegram makes out. Oh, I was nearly forgetting your bag. Now, my man," he said to the chauffeur, "Waterloo Station, sharp. They'll see he takes a ticket for Bournemouth, and they won't suspect anything. Now, for a little adventure." A quarter of an hour later, he was in a cab with Simpson and the heavy leather bag, en route for Paddington. "Mr. Simpson," he said, "you and I are about to run the gauntlet. You may think my conduct is a little strange later." "Very well," replied Simpson, who had hardly taken his eyes off the precious bag. "I have every confidence in you, Mr. Hazell." The winter's day was drawing to a close. Simpson got in the train with the heavy bag, and Hazell stood outside on the platform as if on guard. Presently an old clergyman shuffled along. He was about to get into the same compartment when Hazell stopped him. He bowed politely and got into the one behind. 2 strong-looking fellows got into the compartment immediately in front of Simpson. Hazell still stood on the platform. The hand of the great clock was almost on the moment of departure when he exclaimed, "I've forgotten to get a paper." He ran back to the bookstall, bought his paper, and started back. At that exact moment the guard's whistle sounded, and the train began very slowly. "Look sharp, sir!" It was too late to catch his compartment. He made a rush for the next carriage and swung himself into the moving train, laughing softly to himself. From time to time he looked out of the window. In the darkness he saw the door of the compartment in front of Simpson's open, and a figure on the footboard. Suddenly there was an awful crashing of glass in Simpson's compartment, and the window was splintered to bits. Within 3 minutes Simpson lay on the seat, his hands and feet tied, and a handkerchief over his mouth. "Sorry to have troubled you," said one of the men to the cashier. He tugged the communication cord. There was a shrieking of the engine whistle and a grinding of the brakes. The train came to a standstill, and the robbers jumped and ran for all they were worth. The guard came running along the train together with Hazell. He tore the gag off, and the 2 of them raised a hue and cry that was heard all along the train. "What is it?" asked the guard. "Robbery!" shouted Simpson. "Thousands of pounds!" "Money for a Birmingham Bank," explained Hazell. "Quick! They mustn't escape!" "What was the money in?" asked the guard, who thought the men a couple of fools to travel with it as they had done. "A leather bag. They must have taken it." "I saw them running down the embankment," exclaimed another passenger, "but I'll swear they were carrying nothing." Hazell was standing beside the train. He glanced up at the elderly clergyman. "Did you see them, sir?" he asked.
Yes.
"Could you make out if they carried a bag?"
Yes, I'm sure they did."
"And I'll swear they didn't," said the dogged passenger.
"We'll search the train. Sharp, please,"
said the guard. But nothing could be discovered in or near the train.
"I'm sorry, gentlemen," said the guard, "but I can't delay the train longer. You should have carried the money in my van. All I can do is to stop at Didcot to let you send a telegram or see the police. Seats, please."
Hazell nudged Simpson, and they climbed up into the compartment occupied by the clergyman.
"This is not your carriage?"
he said mildly as the train started. "Oh, never mind," said Hazell. "You'd better wire from Didcot to Mr. Crosby," he said to Simpson. "See the police there, and then come on to Birmingham by a later train."
"What should you do?"
"Oh, I think I'll go on. That's all we can do, I think." At Oxford, the clergyman got out. When he came back to the carriage, he got into another compartment. Hazell followed him. The clergyman grew grumpy and uneasy, but Hazell stuck to him like a leech. not only to Birmingham, but all the way to Chester. The old gentleman told Hazell that he wished to be alone, but Hazell only smiled and offered excuses. When they got to Chester, he stood about on the platform till the empty train was backed off into a siding. The old gentleman, who had been hovering also, swore under his breath. Old Mr. Crosby sat in his private room in the bank. The papers were full of the robbery. A crowd had gathered outside the bank, waiting for the doors to open. Several Birmingham firms were in consternation.
"Can we open?"
whispered Crosby hoarsely. The clock in the office marked 7 minutes to the hour. A cab dashed up outside. The next moment Charles Penfold, fresh and smiling, stood before Crosby, opening a bag and turning out his pockets. There was no time for explanation. 5 minutes later the bank opened and the crowd entered. By common consent they gave way to Kinch, who had come to take his revenge in person. Kinch slammed a cheque upon the counter. The cashier turned it over carelessly to see the endorsement. He had his instructions. "You will take it in notes, I suppose, sir?" he asked coolly. "If you've got enough," replied Kinch. There was a dead silence, broken only by the rustle and crackling of roll after roll of Bank of England notes as the cashier counted them out and Kinch checked them, snarling. Then arose a hum and a buzz. Kinch had been paid. For half an hour the paying cashiers were fairly busy, but the tide was beginning to turn, and in an hour's time the receiving cashiers were doing all the work. Crosby, Penfold & Co. was saved, and the tenders for the railway contracts could be delivered without fear of lack of cash for preliminary expenses and raw material. "One in the eye for old Kinch," was the verdict of the day. "Oh, the thing was childish," said Hazell to Crosby. "I saw that if there was a sham robbery, Kinch would heap vengeance on himself. So I sent Charles down to Bournemouth with my own bags stuffed with gold and slung on the roof of a hansom to avoid suspicion. It was difficult to connect Bournemouth with Birmingham, but we managed to do so by a devious route. Then I filled the leather bag with weights. Simpson, of course, thought we had the money." "Oh, don't say you didn't, Simpson. Don't spoil it." "But what became of that bag?" "Well, that's the greatest joke of all. I saw the beggars hand the bag to the sweet old clergyman. The train had hardly stopped before he climbed to the roof of the carriage, put the bag on the top, and was in the other side of his compartment in a jiffy. I travelled all the way to Chester to prevent him from laying his hands on that bag. He was furious." "But why prevent him when it was of no value?" asked Crosby. "That was just it. If he had discovered it was a sham robbery, he would have given the alarm to Kinch and spoilt it all." "Well, Mr. Hazell, I'm sure the bank is deeply indebted to you." "Not at all," replied Hazell. "It has been a ludicrous little adventure, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it." Thrilling Stories of the Railway by V.L. Whitechurch was read by Benedict Cumberbatch. It was abridged and directed by Fiona Kelcher.